Welcome to the August meeting of the Houston.net Users Group. You're welcome to join us in person for pizza, prizes, and networking on the second Thursday of every month. Our meetings are hosted by Improving Houston in their office at 10111 Richmond Avenue, just inside the Beltway in Houston's West Chase District. You can check us out for meeting notifications at HDNUG.org, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn. And now, a word from our sponsor, Genuint. Genuint is proud to be a longtime sponsor of the Houston.net Users Group. Headquartered in Houston, we believe in changing lives, serving others, and building relationships. We work with technologists and customers nationwide to build proactive, technical communities. We support a number of industries and companies, as well as projects of all sizes. Here's a small selection of the opportunities here in the Houston area at some of the city's top companies. Visit us at Genuint.com to learn more and talk with us about the next step on your career. And now our featured speaker, Tony Champion, will present Building Cross-Device Experiences with Project Rome.
Cool. All right. Well, my name is Tony Champion. Thanks for having me out. Sorry for the late rush in here. The traffic on 59 was a little horrible for me today, but I got here, I guess, with a little bit of time to spare. Today I'm going to be talking about Project Rome. Anybody have heard of Project Rome? There's one because he sat through my talk before. Nobody else? All right, so we're going to walk through this Project Rome. The spoiler on it is basically it's Microsoft's attempt at helping to build cross-device communications for you. We'll look at it. It's got some pieces of Windows 10. It's got a lot of stuff in Microsoft Graph. And we'll kind of go through it in several examples. As we go through this, if you've got questions, feel free to shout them out. There's no reason to hold on or wait or anything like that because it's really not that formal for me. Let's see. So the point of this was to Project Rome team got started because they were looking at a way to drive user engagement. We've found ourselves in a world now where software developers, the users don't really care what device and platform they have, right? They don't care that they're working on a PC during the day or the evening, they have an iPhone, or they have an Android tablet. They don't really care. What they care about is having the experiences that carry with them from device to device. All right, so I always use Facebook as an example. A user, if they want Facebook, they want their Facebook on all their devices. They don't care if as I said, if it's an iPhone and they're going to an Android, they just expect to be able to open the device, have the app, and have the experience. So that way, if they're going through their feed on one device and they have to actually do some real work during the day, and on the way home they're looking at their phone, they still want to have access to that same feed, that same data, the same experience. As developers, that puts us in an interesting situation, right? Because now you're looking at, if you're wanting to create a solution for your end users, odds are, unless you're doing straight enterprise development, you have to at least consider the possibility of writing multiple solutions for multiple platforms. And while there are things like Xamarin and various things that help with that, if anybody's done it, you know that there is not one solution to write one software and deploy it to all these, every platform. And even if there was, there's still the issue you have of being able to develop for a specific platform, right? And use those features of the platform so it makes sense to the user and it flows well. So here are a couple of stats that we're at here. These stats are basically show, kind of go along with what I'm saying, is that most people have multiple devices. And there's a good chance that those devices are not the same platform. Here we go. This is another graphic that basically kind of gives you an example of what I was talking about of, you start your morning off, you're watching TV, you're consuming your information from a TV. As you move on to PC stuff during your work hours, but in the evening hours you go back to tablets and TVs and that type of thing. And this is the problem that Microsoft Project Rome is set to build, set to address. From a Microsoft standpoint, a perfect example of this is Cortana. Right now you have Cortana that sits on every platform. So now you can carry that Cortana experience with you regardless of which platform you're on. And this is kind of their Microsoft's flagship approach of how you can go about doing this. So this gives us Project Roam, and the point of Project Roam is, I guess, at the higher level, they consider it more of a user-based operating system, right? Instead of a physical device operating system, they're looking at creating something that's a user-centric operating system that spans device platforms. It opens up an API that you can share this data across multiple platforms and provide a seamless experience as user goes through. And the point of this is to, as I said, to keep engagement in your apps, in your platform. Because here's the thing: if you're creating I don't know, a recipe app, and it's a great recipe app on Windows, and people love it, but you have users that start going and trying to find the same recipe app on their iPhones and their Androids. They don't have it. What are they going to do? They're not going to sit there and, oh, well, I'm just going to be able to use it on my PC. In today's world, there's tens of thousands of the recipe apps out there. They're simply going to delete it, stop using it, and carry on with something that they can find on multiple platforms. Now, Project Roam, or Roam, or that name might go away. We're kind of in a weird spot. Project Roam has been released. It has full production support from Microsoft, but they haven't quite figured out what they're going to do with the name yet. So depending on who you ask at Microsoft, it's still either Project Roam, or it's Roam, or it's just Microsoft Graph with a couple of endpoints added into Windows 10. So I've dealt with this. Been working with this for a while now. I still call it Project Roam, but it kind of varies on who you ask. It's kind of a wide set, and the umbrella of this kind of breaks up the two different categories. There is the now and the later. What we're going to look at today is the now side of this. This is going to be the remote control sessions, device discovery, using the APIs to share data between devices. The other half of this, which would be a completely other talk, is the activity section. If you've been keeping up with Windows 10 and some of the updates that have been coming through, you're going to start noticing that there is a big shift to activities. And all that activity is a way for your app to pinpoint a spot in time of something you were doing in the app. If you're on Netflix and you're watching a movie and you're an hour and 15 minutes into the movie, Netflix can create an activity, mark that activity. So if you opened up Netflix on that device at a later time or on a different device, you could pull up your activity and say, hey, I was watching Netflix, click that. Netflix can take you right back to where you were. All right, so you're going to find this more and more with Windows as an experience. And it's not just a Windows type of experience. It's APIs that live in Microsoft Graph, which means you can pull them from any platform you want. That's a future talk, or a different talk. It's worth looking into. So today we're going to be looking on the now side of things. Yes? Well, okay, so they're calling it a user-centric operating system because the point of it is to be able to create a system that is focused on the user's information and the user's activities and their devices, but it's not tied to any central operating system. It's not an actual physical operating system.
It's a cloud service that the software can call.
Correct. Correct. So this actually, Project Roam completely sits inside the Microsoft Graph universe. So it's actually just an extension of that. So the evolution of Project Roam, Smart Glass. Anybody remember Smart Glass? Ever use it for Xbox? This is kind of the brainchild of where they came up with this. Smart Glass was basically an app that you could add to your mobile device, to your desktop, that would connect with Xbox and give you an extended experience. Basically, they called it taking the experience beyond the glass. So you could do anything from use it as a remote control and be able to switch through movies or whatever, navigate through your Xbox, or you could create extended experience. one of the things that was demoed and done was Game of Thrones on HBO Go. They did a Game of Thrones experience, so that as you were watching an episode of Game of Thrones, you could pull up on your smart glass. It would show the map of where you were at that given time inside the Game of Thrones world. So it would move you around from area to area and kind of give you some more information, to extend the experience of the show. So this is kind of where the idea started for Project Rome. Is, can we take a single experience and start moving it across devices and kind of beyond the glass? The next part of this that kind of made this work was app-to-app contracts. If you've done any work with WinRT or UWP apps, you know that they run in a sandbox. They run in a sandbox, and communicating in between apps is very difficult. One of the ways to bridge that gap is this concept of app-to-app contracts. So having these app-to-app contracts allow you to have one app that will expose an endpoint or expose a service that other apps can use, whether they're both running in the foreground or if it's a background service or things like that. This was kind of one of the founding blocks of what some of this stuff was built on. And again, it's kind of just to go back over before we dig into the details of this, that all of this was the beginning of the brainchild of what Project Rome became to be. With the Windows 10 part of Project Rome, the stuff that actually runs inside the operating system, it's got a lot of really great features. Things like device discovery, the way it works, it actually will work through not only local networks but Bluetooth or cloud-based discovery, so you can communicate with your devices that are sitting opposite ends of the world if you want to, as long as they're logged in and you're logged in, they're access the internet. It also everything down to Bluetooth, and it does a lot of the communications that protocols actually work very well for doing failovers for you. So it will use whatever is the most efficient, and it will continue on. It will fail over to whatever your current protocol fails over, it kind of drops back to the next line. All right. So the first thing we had with Project Rome is how to handle web links. So in Windows 8, when WinRT, we got this concept of being able to create custom protocol handles. You can still use it in Windows 10. We'll actually look at that in a little bit. So if I sent you a link of my app / do something, and you clicked on that link inside of Windows 10 or Windows 8, what it would do, if that app was installed on the machine, it would register that app once it was installed, so that app would launch. You could pass in the URL into the app of whatever you put your do something message was, and the app could respond to that. So if you had a reporting app and you sent a link to the user with a deep link into whatever current report you're looking at, they could click on it and would open up the app into their to that report. If you were on a Windows 10 or Windows 8 machine and you did not have that app, then the failover was it would take you to the App Store to that was registered with that handle or protocol handle, and then the user could install the app. So that works. It works well. The problem with that is the consistent experience, the break-in experience. So if I have an email that's got links into it, and I'm on one machine that has the app, and I can click on it, I can do whatever I need to, and I go to another machine, I don't have the app, then I've got to stop my experience, go to the App Store, download the app, do whatever I need to get it up and running, and then continue on. So one of the first things they wanted to do was to come up with something to address that experience. You can actually, and what they wanted to be able to do was to handle web links. And so you see this inside your mobile devices now. iOS does it, Android does it. So if you get an email that's got facebook.com/whatever link in it, you click on it. If you have Facebook on the device, it will launch Facebook, and go to whatever that site page is. But if you don't, it will take you straight to Facebook, right? So you don't have that break in the experience. And that was kind of what they were looking to try to address. So with that, you have app URI handlers. And these, as I said, they will take you, if you click on the link, it will take you to the, if your app is registered for it, it will actually pull up the app and launch the app just like we did with the protocol handlers in Windows 8 and Windows 10, or we currently have in Windows 10. It will support increased app launches. So if you do have something, if you are on Facebook or somebody like that that has a local app installed on the machine, and you also provide a web experience, if you want more traffic through your apps, which most people typically do, this will help drive that engagement. So the user doesn't, if they click on it, they don't go, oh, wait, I'm up in the website, let me go open the app and go try to find it in the app. Since there are no store redirects, if you don't have the app installed, it basically will just pull up the browser and take you to the website. Let's see. So let's switch over into my myriad of this. All right. So what I have here is a UWP app is running. How many Windows 10 developers we have that have actually built UWP apps? 1.5. All right. Well, I won't go into a deep dive into some of this stuff. Then we'll just kind of. Yes.
What you are saying about like on that you click on something and won't go into the kind of the browser. So is that similar to what iOS applications usually have?
Yes. So that's the same experience that we're talking about there.
Oh, okay. So it's in the Windows.
Yes. All right, so let me find where I was at. All right. So when you launch a UWP app, you can actually launch a UWP app in a bunch of different ways. I forget, there's something like 24 different ways an app can actually be launched. Anywhere from the default way, which the user actually clicks on the icon and launches the app, to things like using protocols to open the app. There's background tasks that can open the app. There's literally, I think, about 24 different ways. So what happens is you run through, where are we at? Whenever you start an app, whenever an app gets activated, it runs this activated event. And in this particular case, we're looking at a protocol activation. So if the app is done off a protocol, then we'll go through here, we'll actually get the URL that's passed to it, and we can do various things in our app based off that information. Here, all we're doing is we're adjusting navigation in this app based on what that URL is. The other piece of this that you have to have is on the website itself. So in order to prevent at a level of security, so MSN News, their app does this exact same thing. If you are going to MS News site, it's got, if you have the app installed on your machine, it will actually pull up, those links will pull up the app versus going to the website. Now, in order to prevent somebody prevent me from creating my own MS News web app and basically hijack those links and pull up my app and do whatever, show the user whatever I'm wanting to do, the website actually has to have this windows-app-web-leak.json file and its root directory, which does nothing more than basically says, hey, look, if you are this package name, this particular package, then you are able to use this app. You can have multiple packages here, but this just basically gives you some level of assurance that users, if they're going to be using an app to pull your information from your website, that they're actually using yours instead of somebody else's. One of the cool things here they also have is this concept of exclude pass. So if I have a blog app that has all my blog posts and things like that on it, and I have that supported, right? I have the link supported, so if you have a link to one of my blog posts, you click on it, it opens up the app and it opens up the blog post in there. But I don't have my admin piece of my site in the app. There's no reason for it, right? I can actually put exclude these paths, so if somebody had a link, myblog.net/admin, if I exclude that path, then what would happen, instead of pulling up the app, it would basically just carry you on the website. So this allows you to, if you create an app to support a website or your website and you only want to do pieces of it at a time, you can roll this in incrementally and just include the paths that you want or exclude certain paths to keep that experience on the website. So let's see. What do I have? Boy, it's a small. All right. And we were. Going to fill this one. Let's see. Huh. Guess my exercise down. Well, that's not good. All right. Well, carry on. Close this real quick.
Why did they choose the URIs? Is that considered more general? URLs or subset?
Yeah, so they as I said, they already have the ability to have your own protocol, right? So you don't have to, you don't have to use a public URI that way. But this is just a way to take that experience and basically create and redirect users to your app versus going to your website. With the idea that in most cases you would prefer the user to be inside using your app over the web links, and this allows users to share information with each other easily without, hey, go to the app, go to reports, go to subsection B, go to this and this and this and this, and I would take a look at that. Your app can create a link to it, or if they had it up on the website, copy the link and email it to somebody, and you can share that information and kind of keep that consistency of experience going across. So that's kind of their approach to it. And plus everybody else is doing it. So Microsoft tends to like to do that. All right, so do this. Why it's
that was .NET code. Is that the only platform supported?
So for this particular thing, yes, it's a Windows 10 thing. Inside of iOS, handles things their own way. Android handles things their own way for that same type of URL registration. You can do it in both the platforms, but for this particular, for the API URL handler, it's a Windows 10. Yep.
It's marketed as cross-platform.
So for that, so as far as it's not cross-platform for that, as I said, you can register if you have an app running across the platforms. You can do the same thing on the various apps. You just don't have an API for it, or this particular API. This code actually does work. It will actually work on all Windows development platforms. It will work with WinForms. It will work with WPF as well. So you can actually use these deep linkings inside those apps as well.
What about Xamarin?
It will. That API is missing. It doesn't exist. If you're using Xamarin like on iOS or an Android, you would have to both. But Xamarin does expose the APIs for the different devices that you. So you can do the same type of thing on an iOS and Android. You just have to do it for a device-specific approach. So they didn't take this one API and wrap the two approaches for both those platforms. You still have to kind of do the manual work and legwork that way. Let's see if we can get this. Let me do this real quick. Let me take a brief technical issue. Thank you. Oh, no. We're just going to fast forward through all this. All right, so the next piece of this is, I think I talked about most of these. The other thing for UWP apps, the one thing to know for this and for pretty much any feature that you have to basically have to ask the user for permission for, WinRT UWP really made a big push to make everything about the user and give the user control, so you can't do stuff without the user having control whether you can do it or not. In this case, it's just like pretty much anything else. When you open up the app, when the user installs your app, it will register for that web address, and it will handle that rerouting and stuff. Now the user has two choices if they don't want that app, and they can either uninstall the app, or they go into settings and basically disassociate that app with that URL. Once that happens, the only way for you to get that back working is the user has to go back in and do it themselves and say, okay, look, I want to give you access to do this again. That happens for everything. If you want to give the user access to you want the user to give you access to their drive, their resources, anything like that the user gives you permission for in the app, they have the ability to go back and say, nah, I don't want to do that anymore. And once they do that, your hands are tied. The only thing you can do is say, hey, look, this isn't working the way it's supposed to. You have to go do something, and it's on the user at that point. If you do any work with this, one of the interesting things about sideloading the apps, or if you're in developer mode, is that JSON file I showed you that needs to live on the website, it doesn't have to exist there. It doesn't check because it's basically in elevated security mode. Which the only painful part about that, it makes it pretty easy, is that whole exclude paths thing I was talking about. If you want to exclude part of your website, since it's not checking that JSON file, it doesn't actually register those exclusions. So you have to jump through a little bit of hoops to be able to test that. All right, so let's move on to some cross-device communication. So there are a couple of approaches. There are that when we talk about kind of extending this experience and stuff, the first is basically using your app as kind of a remote control, right? I want to use my PC or my mobile device, and I want to tell Netflix on my Xbox which movies to play. And I use it as a straight remote control. And the other approach is this augmented experience that I talked to you about earlier, right? I want to provide additional information to the user while they're interacting with the app in whatever ways. You'll see this. Adding additional information is being up a lot. Is kind of starting to pick up steam. You'll see it in apps where, especially a lot of movie apps and things like that. Amazon Prime does a great job of if you ever watch movies on Amazon Prime, you can see whatever actors and actresses are currently on the screen. They'll give you additional information about those actors and actresses, and it moves throughout the movie. So it's not a full list of whoever's there. It happens. It's exactly who's on the screen at any given time. So these are the kind of two approaches. So with Project Rome, let's see, where Project Rome ends up coming into the Microsoft Graph is that now what they've added into Windows 10 is the ability to look for other devices that in some cases you're logged into, and there's also some ability to open up and share experiences with other users. It will use local resources like Bluetooth and the local network to see if you're logged in on any other devices. It will also communicate with the cloud to find out which devices you're logged into. If you go to, it's accounts.live.com, I think, and you log in there with your Microsoft account, you'll see that pretty much any device that you've ever logged in to your Microsoft account there's a list of those devices. All right, Microsoft Graph is basically just picking up on that information and sharing that with you through the Graph endpoints. Let's see. So what we have then is, if we have this ability to communicate with devices and to discover other devices that we're logged into, once we're able to discover those and we've got that connection, then what this does is this opens up the ability for us to have apps that communicate with each other. Whether it's the same app on both sides, or if it's one app talking to multiple apps on the other side of the line. And it will do this, as I said, it does a failover whatever most performing. If the machines are either on the same network or can talk directly to each other, it will do that. If it can't, you can always go through the cloud and bounce the directions, the communications that way. And we'll look at an example of both of those. So this launch URI async is what I was talking about earlier, where your app in WinRT is able to create basically a custom protocol that's associated with your app. And then if that app, they use that for deep linking, and it can launch your app if you click on a link. Not only do you have that being able to click on a link, but you can also, there's an API to where you can launch these things as well. So if your app wanted to communicate with another app on your machine and it can't communicate directly, especially before we had things like app tap services, the only way to really communicate was to use this launch URI and basically say, okay, app A wants to talk to app B, so I'm going to do app B : / do some work, and here's all my properties. And it would, Windows 10 or Windows 8 at the time would open up the app, the app B would be able to get all the information it needed off that URL and could do some work. And then if it needed to communicate back, it could use that launch URI async and basically push information back that way. Not the best approach if you're wanting two apps to really communicate with each other, but it does a great job of doing simple commands and things like that. Well, what they've done is they've extended this to be able to now use it across devices. Let's take a look at that. So for this, we're going to come over here. So I've got this app that is a pretty simple little app. All it does is allow you to select a color. But this app also is manifest. Registered this Roam remote protocol. So if anything, if I use that launch RAC to do Roam remote / whatever, it will actually work with this machine. What we've got, let me pull up. Let's see, is this one? Here we go. So this particular app is actually a Xamarin app running on an Android emulator. What we're going to do is use Microsoft Graph to basically use that launch URI async from a different device. Let me go ahead and launch this real quick and we'll walk through what this does. And this particular app it does a couple things. It will authenticate me with my Microsoft account, which I need to access the list of devices I have. It will get a list of devices, and then it will interact with the devices in a couple different ways. The interesting thing about this is for the Microsoft Graph API, there are SDKs out there for most platforms. There's one for Xamarin, there is one for native iOS, native Android, there's JavaScript packages, there's Windows packages, and there's SDKs out there for all of that. All of those SDKs do are to wrap the actual web calls. That's all it does. It packages everything into the payloads, JSON payloads you need them in there. It calls the web addresses, pulls the data back from JSON and push them back into objects. That's all it does. So for this particular example, instead of using the SDK and doing all that, all I'm doing is straight web calls. Using HTTP client, pushing data over that way. So it should be in.
You have to set up on each device.
What's that?
Each device has to have loaded.
Right. So any device that you want to communicate that to actually launch that, it needs to have that app actually running or installed in the machine.
Is this Silverlight?
What's that?
It feels like Silverlight in some ways.
It's not Silverlight.
Silverlight is dead.
Yes, I was
Silverlight.
there when it happened. Very sad. Nothing better than to be a Silverlight, Microsoft Silverlight MVP when Silverlight dies. It's awesome. And you went to a MVP summit and you literally had to black out what your MVP was in because everybody laughed at you. So it was a wonderful time. For better or for worse, WinRT UWP feels like it's the native version of Silverlight, if you wanted to call it that, right? It's the new. I mean, it is. It's Windows 10. It's their new device. It's their new app structure, right? It's their store-based app structure to compete with everybody else. So, yeah, and it actually is going to have a little bit of feel for it because the Silverlight XAML team actually, between Silverlight 4 and 5, about halfway in there, they actually migrated Tim here and the entire XAML team over to start on WinRT. And so WinRT started with a code grab of like Silverlight 4.5 or something like that. It was the initial code base for WinRT. All right, so once you log in here, it should give me a list of, thank you. So basically just using the Microsoft endpoint, which is graph.microsoft.com/beta for this particular call, /me/devices, being authenticated with my token, I get back a JSON package of all the devices that I currently have registered for the inside the graph. This sheet here happens to be this. So let's do. She does not like having this many versions of stupid studio. Come on. There we go. All right. But there it is. So this app does two things. One, Android app not attached to running its own emulator, it will actually create, once it pulls a list of devices and you select one, it sends a launch command, which is nothing more than a payload of what URL we actually want to open up. We tell it what the command is, simple JSON that goes across, what the command is, what the type is, and then what our payload is, which in this case is URI. So basically, you just create a small little JSON package. We call this Microsoft Graph endpoint. It reaches out to another device, that machine that we're on, and it runs that command for us. The other part of this is we take that one step further and do like what I talked about earlier, which is we want to change the color. We still are passing the same payload, the same launch URI, because if your app is already running on a machine, it doesn't relaunch another version of the app. It just basically calls that on-activated method that we saw earlier. And we're passing this information in right here. We're saying this is what this is how we're passing the color information. The app retrieves it, and it will work. It makes the changes. So it's a one-way remote, and this works strictly as a remote. The interesting thing about this, and I don't have the demo available yet, I'm still working kinks out of it, but this also works for IoT for Windows 10. So if you're logged into Windows 10 IoT, and this actually the particular demo will have LED lights on it, that same app could be running on, this same app here can be running on an IoT device, and instead of just having this visual display here, as you send it, can change the colors of the light. So you can use this for IoT work, you can use communication that way, and it makes life a lot simpler, so you're not having to write all the communication protocols and handle sockets and all that for something simple like this. Where are we at? So, app services, these app-to-app services that I talked about earlier, where you open up and expose a service that can be used from your app, from other apps, they have done the same thing and made this available to use through the Microsoft Graph or through a direct communication through Project Rome. Same type of thing, except you, instead of doing a launch, you're basically sending a payload into the app service of whatever the information is. So that means you can go through and send in instructions, you can send data sets for data to be worked on, you can do all types of things with it. If you do not have a direct communication, if you're not running a Windows 10 machine that can directly communicate with another Windows 10 machine through the Windows APIs, you can push this information through the graph as well. There are a few limitations to it, mostly in the size. This is not meant to send large data chunks and send megs and megs of data, gigs of data across. I think it's 64K. I believe it's 64K, but this works amazingly well for all types of scenarios, whether you have central app services that are running on beefy servers that need to do a lot of data churning and stuff, so you want to offload that work from one device to another. You can do that easily. You can do the communication that way as well, just as same way we saw as far as connecting to other machines and passing that information that way. It works great. So the thing here, this whole slide about is, since we had 1.5 devs that have done Windows 10 work, the Windows 8 and Windows 10, kind of a little sidebar here, Windows 8 was the first release of Windows that actually went down in the requirements for the hardware requirements for release. Right? Every major release of Windows that has come out, required beefier and beefier machines, more memory, more processing power. Windows 8 was the first one that actually went down to that. And one of the reasons they did that, were able to do that, is because they got very, very particular about system resources. And took some of that application lifecycle outside the developer's hands and put it in the machine's hands. The app services kind of have stumbled across, have that same kind of limitation, which basically is, look, you can run this app service, it will work, communications will work as you expect, but this app service can be shut down at any time by the machine if the system resources are low. The battery power starts running low, memory usage starts going up. Windows reserves the right to kind of take and suspend apps that they aren't being used as often, or have been stale for the longest periods of time, and they can suspend these apps. The interesting thing about that is you get notified if that happens, right? In the software, software gets notified, hey, I'm suspending your service or suspending your app. If you need to clean up anything, go do it real quick. I'll give you a little bit of time. If you don't do that, and it's a suspended state, and the user keeps using the machine, battery power keeps going lower, what ends up happening at some point is Windows can come back and just terminate the app. You don't get notified for that because you're already in a suspended state. So there's a lot of times where, whether you're building app services or you're building UWP apps, that developers get hung up on that and get caught by that, because if your app gets suspended and you don't make sure that you save the state that you're in or save whatever the user's working on, or it's quite possible that whenever the user comes back, if the app has been terminated in the process and the user basically reopens the app, you lose that information. So it's something to be careful for, whether you're doing any of this stuff or if you're building UWP apps in general. Yep. As far as enabling your app services to work across machines to be able to be used by Microsoft, the Graph APIs, it's basically in your app manifest and is remote equals true is all you have to do. And again, the max size is 64K. So typically, what you're going to do is if you have a large chunk of data that you're trying to send from one machine to another, this needs to be, the data stored somewhere else, and you're sending an ID. Hey, go to the database and pull the data for this ID. Go do some work, and then tell me when you're done. Let's see. I'm just smart. Okay, so do this, and then I got one more piece to show you. So as far as the development of this, we're just going to hit this again. Most of it's all sitting in Graph, so you can call the REST APIs directly. You don't have to use SDKs. There are SDKs for most platforms out there. The Windows 10 stuff, the launch URI stuff, the API, all the remote system stuff that we're fixing to look at, all that stuff is actually baked into Windows 10. So there's not even actual additional installs that you have to do on machines or additional packages you have to install on your UWP apps. It already has access to all that. So let's do this. Let me see. Inside your Windows settings, you have this cool little shared experiences thing. You can turn it off. I can't honestly at this point don't remember it. I think by default it is either off or it is set to only my devices. But this basically allows you to open up and communicate from device to device using the remote systems APIs I'm fixing to show you.
Is that for connecting to anyone nearby, or is that?
Any other Windows 10 machine nearby.
Okay. You have to have like some kind of like, I trust this account, and that's cool, or?
So what happens for this particular, if you have that set to where it's shared experiences, then the only experiences you're sharing basically are apps that are running the remote sessions APIs, right? So it's not just opening up your machine to anybody. It's if any of the apps are using these remote sessions. So the app itself, the remote sessions, when you handle it, this information, actually let's go here. Once you create a session, anytime that somebody wants to join that session, you'll get the API basically gets a notification the users wanting to join it. So then the app can handle that workflow, right? You can approach the user, say, hey, so-and-so wants to join your session, you want to allow them, and it handles the authentication. So the app does have to approve that connection, but it's up to app how they want to install it. Like this particular app, or like this demo app right here, doesn't ask, it just automatically allows anybody to join in the session. Now, I won't go into a ton of this, but basically what this app does, here, so what this app here does is it's a simple, it's a simple messaging app that will allow you to, once it launches, just do HDNUG. You can create a session. You can join other sessions if they launch, if they're there. This guy over here will see. All right. So here's my. So now we have basically a simple messaging app. The thing about this that you should be aware of is that all the code that I needed to create a session, a remote session, to allow other people to connect to it, to search for sessions and be able to join a session, to allow the communications to connect to the sessions, to handle messaging from individual users or through basically broadcast messaging across all users. All of that came down to 300 lines of code. If you've ever written any of this type of stuff before, it takes a lot more than 300 lines of code to write. I won't go into the details of it, but feel free to ask me. Come up to me and I can share the code with you. Actually, there's a deep dive for this particular messaging app. The May issue of MSDN Magazine has an article that does a deep dive through it if you kind of want to walk through all the pieces and how to actually build this app up a step at a time. You can go read that. But all of this comes down to 300 lines of code. There are some quirks. It's still a work in progress. It's but right now, it currently only works for Windows 10 devices, especially the shared experience with other users. And the reason is basically the way iOS and Android handles what needs to happen to open up that communication from those devices. It's a little tricky. I've seen a demo of it working, but it was a very rough demo and something that really wouldn't be supported very well. So they're working that out. Hopefully at some point this will kind of open up to where you can share experiences across the board, because one of the things that I actually just about wrapped up and will get launched here soon is this app called, let's see if I got this version should be about to date. Anybody ever play? The scaling of this thing is bad. Anybody ever use Scrum Poker in their sprint planning? So this actually is an app that uses all that same communication, remote services and stuff, which is a version of Schlumberger. It has worked so far across VPNs. It's worked some decent distances that we still run into a little bit of network issues here and there. But this code base will be up on GitHub for too terribly long, and it's a great way to basically go through. And of course, my scaling is horrible, so that kind of defeats purposes. But if you haven't used Schlumberger before, it works great as a way of forcing your devs to actually get involved in the process of estimating tasks, right? So if you're ever in a sprint planning and you've got the one dev who's got the answer for how long everything's going to take, that's a day, that's 2 days, 3 days, and everybody else just kind of goes, yeah, I agree, he's right, and kind of sit back and go on cruise control. Schlumberger basically takes that ability away from them. So everybody basically puts their cards down, face down of, I think it's 1 day, I think it's 2 days. Everybody has to put an answer out there, flip the cards over, and then you can, discuss the pros and cons of who's right and kind of weigh it in that way. It's a great way of kind of basically forcing your devs' hands and kind of pulling that alpha role away from that one person who tends to run with everybody in sprint planning. So, so there's still some tweaks and stuff. This thing's almost done, but it sits on top of this Project Rome and does all this remote services piece. Let's see. I think this is most of what I have, unless you want me to rattle on about other random stuff, which I can gladly do. Any questions?
The Schlumberger part, that would run cross-platform. The technology you're using for that.
So right now, since it's using that remote session share, it would only run on Windows 10.
Okay.
I've got a version of it for Android and a Xamarin version of it that I'm waiting for the team that they know I'm sitting there waiting for them to fix that piece so that we make it work. But as of right now, there's basically OS level issues with being able to do that. So.
Does it handle identity between the user and is your app responsible for that?
So right now, the way it works is your app's responsible for it. When you get a session joined, it's a very weird thing of you get machine level information. You don't get user information, right? So if you're logged in as you on your machine and you actually use the API to request to join a remote session, if you just go off of that, then all I get is, hey, this machine joined, but I don't know who you are. So that's one of the reasons the first piece when you log that Schlumberger, you've got to put in. I have put in a name because there's, I could pull your, you could pull your identity and stuff like that, but you have to send that information. So the workflow is the host machine is running a session. Another machine will ask to join that session. You get that request, you accept it, and then once you accept that, then basically you start broadcasting out all the users that are involved in the system, right? So anybody who's new gets to know who all is joined in, right? All that information gets pushed out. You've got to attach that name somehow so that you can have some kind of visibility into it. And then once you do that, then it's just JSON packages, value set packages really that get passed back and forth from that. And you can you've got communication-wise, you can either communicate directly with an individual or you can basically broadcast out to everybody. So there is, there's reason for both of them. Like that Schlumberger, most everything is a broadcast type of scenario, right? I set my card, I broadcast it to everybody what the card is. If I'm the dealer and I flip the cards, I broadcast that command out to everybody. But then you have other pieces that, like if you want to switch who the dealer is, that would be a point-to-point communication of, hey, I'm going to send you this command so you can now be the dealer to manage flipping the cards and clearing the cards and stuff like that. So, but yeah, for right now, that was one of my first issues. What I brought up to him when we did is like, I'd like to have not have to rely on the app to tell me who this person is and stuff. I'd like for that communication, that piece to come through. But they cited security reasons for that also. You know, how much information do they really want to share with that host machine? So it's when you get into that, there's a lot of give and take that's been going on for, you know, security versus ease of use and things like that. So ideally, what you would do for like a UWP app is that whoever you're logged in as, you know, there's APIs to figure out, you know, to find out who you are, and then you could pass that information, at least as far as a name or whatnot, in that request for joining a session. Yes, sir.
Okay, just to perhaps come a little bit outside of the box, looking at this, based on here, this is mostly concentrating on the user interface, trying to move it across the device, different devices that people are interfacing into whatever your webs, going across these different devices here, starting with the Windows and trying to get switching with the Apple and systems. So we kind of look at a little bit perhaps towards the future. Are we looking at where this thing is eventually be going the other direction, going down into the ultimate device systems and so on, looking more automation? Think older one, whether you're talking about new automated cars and flying cars, even stuff like that, automation coming in all over the place. Even the industrial side, where there's all distributed a little more automated, or taking things down into machinery and so on. They're developing systems down into their devices. They're controlling things, sensing things more, same as the car is sensing more things, but they're developing stuff to the top. You're coming in from the other side, from the user interface, trying to meet this stuff someplace. Are we looking at somehow getting this to expand out into the actual machinery, should we see the automation systems we're developing now?
So my first answer to that would be, if I was going to go that far down the rabbit hole, I wouldn't use this. I would probably start rolling my own. You know, I'd have my own cloud-based services that were saving that information. I would serve it up through my own type of protocols and stuff like that. If I was doing that now, if this, yeah. So, is this going that direction? I really don't know. Because one of the things that you have, since this all sits on Microsoft Graph, the beautiful thing about it is you have access to everything that users graph, right? I mean, from Word and Excel all the way to authentication groups, depending on what they have. If you're in a enterprise spot where you've got like Intune that you're running from managing devices, you can actually manage devices and add and remove apps on those devices and all that through Microsoft Graph. So this kind of gives you an endpoint into that, and to be able to, and this piece of this is just basically opening up a piece of each device that you're on to be able to communicate across your devices, right? So if you had, the scenario you're talking about is plausible. It's just then you start talking about, and you know, is my car, for using the car for example, is my car going to be logged in as me? You know, am I going to sit in, you know, when I get my car, do I log in and have some type of authentication where it logs to my MSA account so that it has access to the graph and can push information, retrieve information and stuff? If the answer to that is yes, well then yeah, then you can actually, some of this stuff that you can start doing that. And you could, if you did that, then you could actually use Microsoft, these APIs and stuff to start the car, you know, to change things like that from a remote standpoint. There'd be no reason you couldn't do that. My concern is that authentication piece of it and how that would work. But if that piece was baked in somehow using Windows Hello, did, you know, facial recognition when you got in the car, so it knew it was you and stuff like that, and kind of, you know, and did that, then you could make that work. But that's what the kind of the breakdown you're going to have in that is that, what if someone else is driving my car? Do I really want that type of communication, that type of stuff opened up between devices for somebody who's driving my car? I sold my car and forgot to, you know, log myself out of the car, basically.
And then you have to put their thumbprint on it, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So
If you solve that problem,
security systems, if you want to keep the security on and keep the pipe all the way up and down the line, that you know exactly who has control and so on, then you might need it.
then you can do it. I mean, you could definitely, if you solve that piece of it, then yeah, you open up a lot of possibilities of how you can handle some of this stuff. So, and what you could do with it, what you can do with it now, if you solve that piece of it. So, as I said, I've got IoT devices that are logged into me that I can use this and remote control them, or I can use those devices can send up information to other places. So that functionality works. It's just from a real world deployment scenario, you still have some challenges to answer that go beyond the operating system and the APIs.
Personally, I'll let you drive the first fully automated car and planes and stuff like that. I'll wait one.
You know what? I like driving, so I think I'll keep control of driving myself. Anybody else? Yes.
I have a couple of questions. First, you just said create an account is developer's account or the users.
The user, it's a Microsoft account. So the MSA
Okay,
account.
so developer don't need to create an account in order to program it.
No, so the only thing, see, before I say that, is the protocol needed for Graph? The only thing that you have to do as a developer is you have to register your app with its apps.develop.microsoft.com to where it basically gives you an ID that you communicate with and use that to help communicate with. That is so your device has access to the Microsoft Graph is really all that's about there. Because Graph limits the there's only so many ways you can pull in as far as authentication into in the Graph. And that piece comes in when you make that authentication request. So when you authenticate your MSA account, you're basically offloading you open up a web view and you're going to the standard, relive.com login, but you're sending in your API for your app, and it's authorizing that app to make sure that's a valid app. That's the only piece that you have to have.
Okay, so I just need one account to develop all my mobile applications. I just need one or each project.
You can just have one. You can just have one, and that account can be your personal account because it's not that all you're needing is that API key. It's not actually using your authentication or anything like that. It's just whatever account you use to actually register the app with Microsoft and to get access to the product.
Where do you register?
I think it's apps.developer.microsoft.com. I'd have to look it up, but I think that's what it is. I think it's apps.developer.microsoft.
The tutorial's about it, right?
Yes. Yeah. There's that article, that magazine article should have that link into it as well. But yeah, any Microsoft Graph, you go to graph.microsoft.com, that gives you all the SDK about Microsoft Graph. There's a great SDK Explorer, web-based Explorer there, to where all the API calls, you can actually just run them from the web, so you can see what the payloads look going across the line, what the packages come back, do it straight from there. That makes life a lot easier than trying to figure out what the SDK is doing. And also it's got walkthroughs and samples and all that, and how to register your apps and things like that. So
Right now, I know you've mentioned it, but what sort of use cases are people using for Roam right now?
So I have seen a couple of remote control apps and augmented experiences apps out there. Trying to think if any of them have actually been released. I'd have to go back and look.
What were they trying to solve?
So I worked with, we did a proof of concept with Roam. I built the WWE Network app for Xbox and for UWP. So we did a proof of concept with this, which was an extended experience app of doing the same thing like Game of Thrones did, which was whenever, if you're watching a wrestling match in the app, whenever certain wrestlers, were getting in the ring, the app would pull up those wrestlers and give bio information and stuff like that. So it was an extended, that as of last time I heard has not been released, but I've been on that project for 9 months now. So, but we did a proof of concept for that. I have seen people use it for, it's nothing big in the wild, but used it for remote stuff for IoT. to be able to control IoT devices and stuff. Using basically that launch URI, those graph calls that I was using there.
So can you put things on your Raspberry Pi that play well with this?
As long as it's,
Or is it, you have to put 10 on the Raspberry?
you've got to put 10 on the Raspberry Pi to be able to receive that information and stuff like that.
IoT edition.
Yeah.
It's not full-blown Windows 10. It's Windows 10 IoT edition that goes on the Raspberry Pi.
It's quite fun to play with.
It is.
I was hoping to get my demo, my nice little LED demo. That plays well a lot better than a color block on the screen, but you know.
You should do logic. You do logic with review what you-
It's the Raspberry Pi. It's a real computer.
No, I know that. It's just on the IoT test.
Yeah, it's a
UWP.
Yeah, it's a UWP apps that run on the IoT
It's
device.
on .NET.
Yeah, C#, .NET. It's .NET Standard 2, right? So I think what they're using now. But
I can't keep that straight.
yeah, but it's a UWP app that runs. The interesting thing about that is you can actually, like the app I showed you that with the color block and stuff on that, I could actually run that. I could write the code into that particular app that would run on this machine. If it was running on this machine, it would do that. If it was running on an IoT device, it would control the light sensor instead of actually showing that there's not a display. So you can actually deploy the same UWP app on any version of Windows 10 that UWP apps will install. So, and you can build for the experience of the device.
So you can talk to it, it can play with Bluetooth.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and if you're targeting stuff like Raspberry Pi, you'll have access to all the GPIO and that kind of stuff, right? Because you've got all those GPIO headers on the Raspberry Pi device. You have access to all of that stuff using a Windows 10 IoT project.
Another question.
Oh, yes.
I remember before there is a framework called the Target framework. Microsoft created. Basically, it's just wrap all those OSs into wrapper.
Okay.
So, and this one, they started calling operating system. So I'm wondering what's the difference between that Target framework and with this operating system?
So the term user operating system is a marketing term. Is really all it is. It's a marketing term to sell the aspect of that we're trying to create experiences that are crossing devices and crossing platforms and being user centric versus device centric. Like your operating system, your machine, it's device centric. It's all about this particular machine. They call it. They try to coin the term user operating system by instead of the operating system being on this machine, the operating system is about me and all my devices, and it spans across my devices. It's still just a set of APIs.
But for the developer, like when I develop an application, do I still need to use that Target framework or no?
For this, no, this is all you need for the APIs. I mean, you can use, there are SDKs that you can download and install that kind of wrap some of the stuff, but all you need is an HTTP client on whatever framework you're using, and then you can make all these calls, all these graph calls.
Okay, analysis, in order to use this application, user has to create an account with Microsoft, or like I don't want my device to communicate each other, but I want these applications I can use, he can use, anybody can use on different platform device. Is this okay?
So you still have to, the user still has to log in with a Microsoft account. Now, if they're on, unless they really try to jump through hoops, they're going to have a Microsoft account if they're going to log into the Windows 10 machine. If you are creating experiences for iOS and Android, then there is that possibility the user doesn't have a Microsoft account, and they'll still have to have one to be able to use those APIs. If they don't have a Microsoft account, it doesn't work. Now, those Microsoft accounts are free, but yeah, for this particular thing, you would have to have a Microsoft account. Cool. Well, that's it. I'll hang around for a little bit. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for the August 2018 meeting of the Houston.net Users Group. Our next meeting will be on September 13th at the Improving Houston office at 10111 Richmond Avenue. If you happen to be in Houston then or on any second Thursday, we'd love for you to join us.